Sergey Viktorovich, thank you very much for responding to the invitation of our project. We go out, work with an internet audience. It's called The New World. About how, in what contours of the new world we live today, the project is aimed at a youth audience. We tell you how this new world works, according to what rules it will be built, according to what canons, and now in general.
Do you know everything?
No, we discuss it with experts. We discuss it with those people who make decisions. And we just took a cross-section on the internet, who the internet considers to be its heroes, who is interested in listening, and who makes the decision. And the first number of the ministry of Vladimir Putin, the second Sergey Lavrov. In the last decade, our diplomacy has been on top, absolutely recognized all over the world. And this is thanks to the work of your team, you personally as a leader. So if not only as a minister, but as a graduate in general, everything that is happening in the world today is expected or surprising for you.
You know, waiting. This is not, strictly speaking, part of the diplomatic profession. Waiting. This is for political scientists. In 1991, when the Soviet Union disappeared, Francis Fukuyama solemnly proclaimed the end of history and declared that from now on, and he said that he did not expect, he was sure that from now on, liberal democracy would rule the world in any country. Therefore, let political scientists fantasize, let them expect. We must deal with purely concrete facts. But in order for these facts to be acceptable to us, we must do everything to strengthen our positions on the world stage. That's what we are doing, proving our right to defend our security, to defend our allies, to protect people who belong to the Russian world, who are our compatriots. We are doing this now in Ukraine. You see the reaction of the West. I don't have any expectations right now. I'm not going to express them. I'm not even going to try to formulate them. Because we are engaged in a specific matter, ensuring Russia's foreign policy interests. In a situation where our guys, our girls are fighting as part of a special military operation. And the main task now, to achieve the fulfillment of all the goals set by the President. And what are the expectations of the West? You hear, they are constantly speculating. Then let's stop here now, then a truce in 10 years. We will think about who to give Crimea to, who to give Donbass to. This is fortune-telling on coffee grounds, and I'm not going to do it. We have our own tasks, and we will solve them.
We are a film crew at the front. We make reports of the film from there. They follow international relations very closely. They follow your statements very closely. They respect you very much. And, well, for the guys who are fighting at the front today, they want to understand the image of victory, what they are fighting for. Do you have such an image as a person, as a minister? What kind of image of victory does Russia have today?
We all have the same image of Russia's victory. Victory. The image is probably the brightest. This is the 9th of May, 1945th year, and I have no doubt at all that our heroes, who are now going on the offensive and ousting the enemy from our ancestral lands, are primarily inspired by the heroism of their fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers.
Well, here we are trying to build contours, some boundaries of the modern world, to understand, to feel. Is it possible to talk about such contours for the next 10 years, for 25 years?
It's not for me. We are obliged to ensure Russia's interests in full compliance with its constitution, with the tasks set by the President, and not only in the context of Ukraine, but in general within the framework of the concept of Russia's foreign policy. This includes promoting the concept of a large Eurasian partnership, so that all structures, all countries that are located on the Eurasian continent, promote contacts among themselves, exchange integration experience, harmonize their projects, implement large-scale infrastructure tasks, including the well-known North-South Route project, the North-South International Transport Corridor. This also includes the project in connection with the ports of India, for example. The sports of the Far East, the Northern Sea Route.
Сюда же относится и проект по связи портов Индии, скажем, с портами Дальнего Востока
We have one continent, a God-given continent with huge, richest natural resources, with several thousand-year-old civilizations. And it would be wrong not to use these competitive advantages. This is the meaning of the idea of the Great Eurasian Partnership, in which we are already seeing the first steps. Through the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Asian ties are being established between them. Dialogue is being established, and if all the plans are progressing, the Great Eurasian Partnership will create a very solid material. Economic Transport Foundation for the President he called it the new architecture of Eurasian security.
Транспортный фундамент для того, что президент назвал новой архитектурой евразийской безопасности.
This is our interest. Moreover, it was specifically said that this architecture, as well as the Great Eurasian Partnership, should be open to all countries' continents, including the western part of Eurasia, which is still trying to ensure its interests, within the framework of non-Eurasian, which would be natural given the geography, but within the framework of the Euro-Atlantic concept, thereby confirming that they are not going to do anything without the United States.
Тем самым подтверждая, что без Соединенных Штатов они ничего делать не собираются.
But these Euro-Atlantic motives are slowly disappearing from the positions, from the speeches of several European leaders, and Hungary, first of all, and Slovakia, and a number of other politicians, who are especially in opposition to the neoliberal regime that now dominates Europe. They are already beginning to think that they need to rely more on their own forces, on cooperation with those who are located next to you.
Полагаться на свои собственные силы, на сотрудничество с теми, кто с тобой рядом расположен.
The idea, the interest of Americans. It is understandable. We are sitting across the ocean. No one will get us here, supposedly. But Europe will solve our problems, both in terms of science and arming Ukraine against the Russian Federation, in terms of paying the price for the tragedy in the Middle East. Europe is being dragged into the South China Sea, into the Taiwan Strait, Germany, France, Britain, of course, where without it, participates in naval exercises, creates block systems, triples, fours, occuses, quads. All this with the declared goal of deterring China. In other words, our Western colleagues have their own views on Eurasian security, and these views boil down to the fact that the United States should rule everywhere. We oppose such a selfish and aggressive approach to the concept of uniting the efforts of all countries of the continent and developing principles, taking into account the existence of such military political structures, or structures dealing with military political issues as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The Asian has elements of military political security, the organization, the Collective Security Treaty, building links between them, leaving the doors are open for everyone who wants to work, not on the basis of rules that no one has seen, but which the West, for no reason and for no reason, constantly puts forward as an indispensable condition for contacts, but on the basis of international law and its central element. Sovereign equality of the state. That's what we're trying to achieve. Of course, we still have a lot of partners, and their number is growing outside the Eurasian continent. And our activity within the Brics framework is already taking effect here, but this is a separate topic.
Well, by the way, the topic of Brics has become popular on the internet. The young audience is reaching out, trying to understand what kind of structure it is, how it will be built. Even there is such an expression, everything will be Brics. In other words, everything will be fine. And it's as if you mentioned some structures that can ensure Eurasian security. Eurasian security. Can such a structure, some kind of unified structure, be built within the framework of the Brics? Or is Brics not about security at all, about the economy?
Brics is about everything. Brics is about a world order that will be based, as I have already said, on the main principle of the UN Charter. the sovereign equality of states. Brics was created naturally when the fastest-growing economies felt the need to communicate together and see if they could use their economic achievements to work more effectively on a global scale, using their contacts, their influence.
Для того, чтобы более эффективно работать в глобальном масштабе, используя свои контакты, свое влияние.
And the BRICS, unlike the Seven, unlike other institutions that control the West, including the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Trade Organization, he simply came to the conclusion that everything that the Americans are still holding under their control, which was created many, many years ago and sold everyone as a global good, bearing in mind their concept of globalization, inviolability of property, fair competition, the presumption of innocence.
Так сказать, продавалось всем как всемирное благо, имея в виду их концепцию глобализации, неприкосновенность собственности, честная конкуренция, презумпция невиновности.
What wasn't there? All of this collapsed overnight when they wanted to punish Russia.
Захотелось наказать Россию.
By the way, more than half of the countries of the world are under sanctions, just not as unprecedented, perhaps, as what is being used against us, against North Korea, against Iran, Venezuela, but nevertheless. But the real reason why they are literally frenzied right now, I will use this word, is that China bypasses America very quickly, confidently, and bypasses America on the basis of the same norms that Americans have laid down in institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and bypasses. Despite the fact that these institutions, these mechanisms are being abused in every possible way by the Americans controlled by them.
Контролируемые их американцы всячески злоупотребляют.
And the task of containing China has now been put forward by the Biden administration. I assume that it will remain a priority for the Trump administration as well. For them, the main threat of today. Russia should not be allowed to prove that it is a strong player and that it undermines the reputation of the West. They don't care about Ukraine, the reputation of the West. So we said that there would be such a government in Ukraine, and then someone suddenly dared to object. Russia is nothing. It's a big country, but we need to put it in its place. That's what it's about, and not at all about the fate of the Ukrainian people. Their people are not interested. Zelensky, now realizing that they don't care about the people, has already proposed in his so-called victory plan that the West take all the natural resources of Ukraine and own them, and Ukraine will send police officers and military personnel to ensure order in Europe because the Americans are already tired. It means leaving a certain number of Americans, and then these Gauleiters, elders, like what happened during the Great Patriotic War. World War II, they will do the dirty work and restrain protests, suppress those who want to be guided not by the Brussels neoliberal dictatorial dogma, but by the search for national interests. This is a big process, and BRICS, of course, it has to do with Eurasia in the sense that there is China, India, Russia, and Pakistan. This is understandable, but still the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's about the Eurasian continent and how it develops, what plans it formulates, and then implements them both in the economy and in the military-political sphere, because anti-terrorist exercises are held. Law enforcement cooperation through the security councils of the member countries is very tight. And, of course, the humanitarian aspect, the exchange of best practices in the field of education, cultural programs, sports events. This is a regional process that we encourage in every possible way, just as we sympathetically follow and are ready to help deepen integration within the framework of the African Union, within the community of Latin American and Caribbean countries. All these structures have now become more active, primarily because they are becoming more and more aware of the unreliability of the mechanisms of functioning of the world economy and in general of world relations, which were once proposed by the West, accepted by everyone, and now the West is abusing them, and very harshly abusing them. And no one wants to be next. No one knows firm which foot someone will get up in Washington tomorrow, and who will not be sympathetic to this person, and with whom he will start talking in the language of dictation. Therefore, without opposing the existing institutions, neither the Monetary Fund, nor the World Bank, nor the TO, without demanding their closure, but seeking a fair reform of these structures, at the same time, in parallel. The countries of the Global South, the Global East, the world majority simply create their own parallel mechanisms and settlements, and logistics chains and insurance mechanisms, in order not to depend on the exchange. At the last Brics summit, we proposed creating a Brics grain exchange, and everyone reacted very positively to this. All this is in order to trade normally, calmly, use various routes, banking connections that would be protected from dictate, and firm possible damage by those who control the classical structures of the world economy. Therefore, Brics acts as a regional integration, which I have just mentioned. In Eurasia, it is the SCO, the Eurasian Economic Union, Asian and contacts between them in Africa, African Union in Latin America, SILIC, and at the global level, of course, everyone sees the Brics Union as a flexible, non-bureaucratic structure that can harmonize all these regional processes. Moreover, the leading countries of the SCO, Asia, the African Union, and Latin America, they are all represented either among the Brics members, including the Arab world, which is also an important thing, or among those countries that traditionally cooperate with Brics in the Brics South Reach format. Now we have created a category of partner countries. In total, more than 30 countries want to get closer to the Brics. This is a very serious trend that allows us to discuss issues of harmonization of the work of the world majority in all areas, in economics, politics, finance, and the humanitarian sphere at this level at Brics summits.
Is it correct to say that Brics today is such an integration platform that is ready to include the organizations that you mentioned? And is it about institutional formation, that is, within the Brics? Will there be a headquarters in a neutral country? Or are there no such conversations at this stage yet?
Brics. This is not a platform, it is a natural association in which regional integration platforms see an ally and see a way to harmonize their plans at the global level. There is no question of bureaucratization of Brics. Everyone is impressed by flexibility. Every year, the chair country changes according to the alphabet. It is she who performs the functions of the secretariat, the organizers of various events, and so on. And it upsets everyone right now. I am sure that this is for a fairly long period of time. This is the best option.
After all, Brics is a truly epoch-making event in Kazan, with almost 30 heads of state. Is it possible to compare with some historical event that is in scale with Tehran, with Vienna? With Vladimir Putin mentioned the Westphalian system of international relations, Yalta. This is a new stage. And is it possible to give some name to this stage?
Well, call the Brics. This is Brics. But all the examples that you have just mentioned, they are about something else. These were all meetings where they shared the world.
Post-war settlement.
As we say, according to concepts. Everyone wanted to defend as many rights as possible in the systems that were born, including in Yalta. And the Soviet Union achieved this. But it was still a division of the world. Brics is not going to divide the world at all. Brics, this is an association of countries that simply want to live on the lands that God and their predecessors have given them. As is customary in their civilizations, great civilizations like China, India, Iran, Russia, and many other countries. And that no one dictates to them how to trade, so that no one dictates to them. He did not prohibit the processing of natural resources, as it is in Africa. We have just held a meeting in Sochi, a ministerial conference of the Russian Partnership. Africa. The overwhelming majority said that they could no longer put up with a situation when all that nature had given them were the richest reserves, including rare earth metals and uranium, and much more. They simply extracted with the help of Western companies. Western companies took it all to their processing plants, and all the added value and all profits stay there. Clean water. This is a topic that united Russia, in cooperation with its fraternal parties in the countries of the Global South, is actively promoting. In the past, this year, in February, the founding Congress of the Interparty Movement for the Freedom of Nations was convened. The goal, the fight against modern practices on colonialism. United Russia held an inter-party event dedicated to this task in Vladivostok in June, and a permanent forum has already been created. It is for the freedom of nations. A lot of African parties are represented in it, but not only. And of course, it is very important for Africans, that they manage their wealth, their destiny. Last year, when I was assigned to represent the president at the Johannesburg summit, there was a whole story with refueling the plane for the flight back, because, it turns out, almost all the companies that refuel aviation fuel there, they do not belong to the country. There was the same story in Brazil, when I was also on a visit, and it was impossible to refuel. And this, of course, is annoying. Americans, when they impose such sanctions, they do not understand that, yes, they will have to be afraid of these sanctions for some period, to avoid so-called secondary punishments, but normal people, of course. Resentment for their country, for their sovereignty, inevitably forms and grows stronger. By the way, Trump intuitively felt this when he said that the use of the dollar as a weapon. This is the grossest mistake of the Biden administration, because by doing so they create the ground, create the conditions for the dollar to be abandoned. Within the framework of the Brics, once almost all trade was in dollars, now less than 30% within the framework of the Brics.
calculations in dollars? Maybe, if the world has realized today, and in this regard, Russia, in such leadership positions, can lead the movement for the freedom of those states that are still experiencing remnants of colonialism. Maybe the moment has come for some kind of adoption of a declaration against modern forms of colonialism. Maybe this kind of work could be done just inside the Brics. And in general, does the modern world need to say clearly today that colonialism is everything?
Well, first of all, colonialism is not everything because, unfortunately, not all the territories that were colonial possessions of Western countries, and the liberation of which was demanded by the General Assembly back in 1960, have not yet been liberated. In violation of these resolutions, both France, Britain, and a number of other Western states refused to liberate what they once seized through these colonial wars. But there is probably no need to create a structure now, because I just mentioned that on the initiative of United Russia, a movement, a forum called for the freedom of nations, was created exactly so that it is written in its charter. It was proclaimed in February. Fight against modern practices of neocolonialism. Colonialism still retains some relapses in the form of small island states, which exist primarily in and around Africa. But nevertheless, decolonization took place as such a global process. But then, when Africa gained independence, it began to turn out that there is political independence, but a very simple example.
Но потом, когда Африка обрела независимость, стало выясняться, что политическая независимость есть, а, ну так прям совсем простой пример.
And they can't refuel their guest's plane.
Они не могут.
Ugandan President Musk did not give an example of the world coffee market in them at the Russia-Africa summit last year. Almost all coffee beans are produced, a huge share of world production. They are harvested and grown in Africa. The global coffee market is estimated at about 450 billion euros, and less than 20% remains in Africa. And he gave an example, President Museveni, that in Germany alone, due to processing, roasting, packaging, delivery, income is obtained from the coffee industry more than from the whole of Africa. These are kind of like free countries. Their economies are largely bought by former metropolises. And when a country like Zimbabwe decided to take away, nationalize from white farmers a few decades ago, it was punished with very severe sanctions. Decolonization. Yes, but a real opportunity to dispose of your freedom and your resources. This is different, and this is where the very neocolonialism comes into force. Now in Sochi, when we held a ministerial conference, and at last year's Russia-Africa summit, trends that can be called the second awakening of Africa are already clearly manifested. Having thrown off the chains of colonialism, the brutal subjugation of peoples by Western metropolises, they realized that now they also need to throw off the chains of economic dependence, and this process will expand. Russia, unlike Western countries, invests in Africa in such a way as to stimulate the production of goods needed by Africans. For example, we supply fertilizers. In a number of African countries, there are conditions for producing fertilizer themselves. We help them with this. But there are also similar reverend examples of localization of what they need and what we have. There are a lot of them. This is a different philosophy. But will a banner be raised with the inscription bold neocolonialism, or will work simply be carried out? It doesn't matter. But there is no stopping the movement in this direction.
If Trump came to power today, in January of this year, you mentioned that this would not affect us policy in Ukraine. Do you remain with this opinion, or do we take into account the fact that the appointment of President Trump's administration is taking place now? There are those candidates and those names that have repeatedly mentioned fatigue from Ukraine, that it is necessary to stop spending money on Ukraine, but up to the point that Trump said that it is possible to withdraw from NATO. From him, and such messages sounded. How do you assess the prospects for a settled situation of the Ukrainian issue with the arrival of the Trump administration now?
Washington's principled attitude to Ukrainian affairs and to European affairs will not change, in the sense that Washington will always strive to keep under its control everything that happens in the near NATO, of course, in the NATO space itself. And the European Union. This is already the same as NATO in military political terms. How it will be done, how they imagine the implementation of their control functions in the new conditions, it can be done in different ways. And I don't presume to guess, but I have no doubt that they will want to leave these processes under their control. Because now some have begun to look more soberly at the specific Ukrainian situation and say that what has already been lost, you can't return it, let's freeze somehow, but they are still.
Let's decide in 24 hours what Trump said.
This.
Impossible.
I'm not talking about that. I don't want to pay attention. All the same, what is being offered even by those who are trying to present now as radically exchanging positions and wanting to stop the war? They are still talking about, along the line of contact, a truce for 10 years, then we'll see. But these are the same Minsk agreements in a new package, even worse. The Minsk agreements, they would have been final if someone had bothered to understand that this was exactly the case. It was about a small part of Donbass, to be honest. Everything collapsed because Zelensky and Poroshenko before him categorically did not want to grant this part of Donbass, which would have remained Ukrainian, a special status primarily in the form of the right to speak their native language. And the fact that the West swallows it all, despite our numerous reminders of the root causes of this conflict, among which are not only the involvement of Ukraine in NATO, but also the legislative, conscious extermination of all Russian. Now we won't even have time to list on your air the laws that have banned education, mass media, cultural events, and in general, simply banning the Russian language in everyday communication. No one pays attention to this. Look, among those who are now in the camp of Republicans expressing, as they write, revolutionary ideas on how to end the Ukrainian conflict, no one has ever mentioned anywhere that, well, yes, and it is necessary, of course, to return the rights of the population of Ukraine to talk, to study, to teach their children in Russian, to receive information on in Russian. We repeat this many times, we have repeated it and continue to do it. None of the architects of the so-called Ukrainian settlement in the West pays any attention to this at all, which means, from my point of view, again to the question of the similarity of the goals of any administration. They are happy that they weaken Russia and its influence, weaken the Russian world, because in the end everything that happens, rests on the desire to suppress Russia as a competitor.
упирается в желание подавить Россию как конкурента.
The Americans declared a long time ago, there should not be a single state on earth that would be more influential than the United States. That's what it's all about. But their attitude to the Russian language, and this is one of the most important human rights, is very indicative.
The Trump administration. Elon Musk's appointments have already happened. Is there any field for fresh thought here?
Expectations, divination will not. We will judge on specific cases.
Specifically in Ukraine today, there is a big question about the legitimacy of the government, and there were such reports in the media that elections are possible in May, at which Zelensky, let's say, will no longer be elected, or will be elected. Will the elections solve the issue of legitimacy? And will it be possible to negotiate with such a power after that?
I don't know. Elections can be organized in different ways. You can see how the elections were organized in Moldova. And we can judge the legitimacy of an electoral process only when we understand that it took place and see how it was organized.
But with the current regime, there can be no agreement on peace with the existing Zelensky regime. Do we understand correctly?
The president has repeatedly said, I'm even tired of quoting, that we have never refused negotiations. And it is clear that Zelensky will not decide. But if they call us for negotiations and try to turn everything upside down and say that it is Ukraine that wants negotiations, but Russia refuses, Putin has said many times, but let him at least cancel the decree of 2 years ago, which prohibits negotiations with Putin's government. So I'm not even going to expand here anymore.
On Valday, Vladimir Putin gave such a very thoroughly substantiated information about how relations between the presidents of the Russian Federation and the United States were developing. He mentioned both Bush sister and Bush Jr., and in general, the world, a certain part of the world, has a feeling that it is possible to restore contacts between the administrations of Russia and the United States. Given the familiarity with Trump, is there a basis for restoring this?
It's even strange to hear such a question, because Putin said on Valday that he was always ready to communicate. We didn't interrupt him, the ball is on the other side.
Today, Russia has made a global turn to the east, strengthening such powers as China, India in the future for 10, 15, 20 years. We are moving in the same direction with China and India. And can we say that Russia, given that in general both China and India may have contradictions, can be such an intermediary between these powers that are gaining strength, including economic power?
We are moving in one direction, in the direction of strengthening national sovereignty, relying on our own resources, primarily in the interests of development, and making maximum use of equal, mutually beneficial contacts with neighbors and partners. And in this sense, Russia, India, and China remain a very important triangle, which was formed organizationally by Evgeny Maximovich Primakov in the late 90s, and which continues to function.
И который продолжает функционировать.